Hey, so going to talk about Squirrel because Dash Render and I've been talking about this online, and Telegram stopped working, so all my messages are not going through. Wonderful. So the whole Squirrel thing is weird, right? So the first question with any new technology like this, right? The question is, well, one, is this bringing something new to the table that a new feature we've never had? No, it doesn't. It's just a login system, right? So this is a replacement for existing authentication, which, fine, there are weaknesses in authentication, so that's not inherently a bad thing. The question becomes, what is the itch it's trying to scratch? We have to ask this about every new technology, right? Oh, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Really? What problem do I have that this is fixing? And the problem with Squirrel is that we can't find one. Right, username and passwords, they work great. People understand them. Normals, as people call them, right? End users can understand username and passwords. If they can't, they're not going to understand anything else, right? It's the simplest thing. They have to identify themselves, and they have to have a password. Passwords have been around for so long, whether you like them or not, they are the easiest thing. And there are password managers that make using passwords really easy if you want to have a mechanism for it. If you don't, you can use your brain, right? That's one of the nice things about the whole username and password system, is that it's designed around humans, not technology, so that humans can use it, but we've developed the technology, things like LastPass or KeyPass or whatever, so you can, for free or paid, have mechanisms that make it work pretty flawlessly. And browsers have built-in things that are similar to those that you can use, right? There's all kind of, we're not recommending one or the other, just saying that these things exist and they're already really easy to use. On Steve Gibson's site, he talks about anonymity with Squirrel, and that's just not a thing. Right, I don't know what people are thinking, and Dash Render and I talked about this, and he's not thinking anonymous either. But it is mentioned, and Chad brought this up, that one of the things they're pushing is this anonymous login. Well, you can't log in anonymously. If you think about it, the purpose of logging is to stop being anonymous. We're already anonymous when we sign in as a guest, right? Now, we're not totally anonymous, right? You can still track your IP address. You can potentially track cookies, things like that. You can turn off cookies. You can use Tor to hide your IP address. So from the server side, having a guest means anonymous. The two are synonymous. Synonymous. But once you log in, no matter how you do it, whether you're using username, whether you're using Squirrel, you are no longer anonymous. You have been identified. Now, if you create your own username, you get to pick what it is. With Squirrel, it picks what it is. That's about the difference. Websites would have to adjust if you want to have a username you control, right, to have some kind of identity. So sites like Mangolossi, just as an example, allow you to pick a username and they display that username. They don't display some other alias. They simply display your username. Now, that's a pretty simple thing to solve, but it's something that everybody would need to solve because almost everybody does that. So sites like ML would have to implement Squirrel, they would have to also create an alias system so that you would have to maintain another piece of data so that you could see how humans identify you or have control over it. Otherwise, all humans would have to identify you by a gibberish string, which could work, but would be super irritating and we would all hate it, which, once again, makes Squirrel harder than what we have today, right? It takes something that's already so easy and managed, and we have no problems with, and makes it a little bit harder, right? But it also confuses people. It makes people start thinking they might be anonymous. Starts them thinking that things might be magic and more secure. That's bad, right? It's security theater, and that appears to be what Squirrel is and always was. It's making up fears for things that don't exist, right? No one's out there going, oh, passwords are so tough, how do I get around them? No, you just store them some way, right? We're past that. We're decades past that. So this is not an itch someone's looking to scratch, so they had to come up with this, oh, anonymous, oh, tracking, oh, there's all these concerns. This is what Squirrel does, but it doesn't solve any problem that we have today. I mean, certainly having a long key is better than a short password. That's great, but it doesn't mitigate man-in-the-middle attacks. It doesn't even begin to address the complexities with how you're going to store a key, sync a key across devices. With passwords, you can do it by hand, right? If I go to a library and sign into a computer, I'm able to log into things with my username and password because it's a human device. It's easy to use. When I do this, how am I going to get my private key onto that library computer? And then how am I going to be 100% sure that that's been erased from disk, because it's going to have to be stored somewhere before I use it? And oh my gosh, the level of potential exposure that Squirrel creates is scary, right? So Maybe they're coming up with ways around that, but you're going to have to store that stuff, and you're doing things that end users are going to find extremely complex. It's going to be very difficult to explain to someone, well, you're storing this key, but you still have this username and password because you have to create the account before you associate it with this key. And then you have to store this key, and it's decentralized. So even though this key is the same, your username is not the same, and so that's going to be weird across all sites. It's going to be very complex, and you have to do all this explaining, and then you have to explain how if your key store gets compromised, you're 100% compromised everywhere instantly. It's not like a one by one, like, oh, I use this login here and this login there. Someone got one but not the other. It's one thing compromises you everywhere. That's partially a risk. The other is if you lose it, which is a thing that, as IT professionals, not the biggest deal for us. We're not so likely to lose our key stores because we understand backing up, we understand having multiple copies, those kinds of things. For a normal user, for someone who only has a Chromebook, for someone who only has a phone, for someone who only, and doesn't normally have things that they have to back up, this is, oh gosh, I dropped my phone in a toilet. Well, I'll just, oh wait, that wasn't backed up. Oh no, I lost my identity across the board everywhere. Universally lost my identity. That's a really big fear. So the more we look at SQRL and the more we have over the years, we have these concerns that it appears to be not scratching any existing itch. It appears to introduce more problems than it solves. It doesn't appear to solve any, really. I can't come up with anything it solves, right? I already have everything that SQRL supposedly makes easy. I already have easy. As easy as SQRL or easier. But the additional things that it introduces that are risky get pretty large, either extremely cumbersome or extremely risky. You can mitigate the risk, but only by being very cumbersome. The other thing is, so if you go on the SQRL forums, there's a lot of people talking about it. No one doing anything as far as I can tell, but a lot of people discussing it. But that tends to happen in communities like this, right? Steve Gibson is a big blog personality, a big podcast personality. A lot of people listen to him. You go to his website and things are fishy, right? So all of this is before we address things like go to his website and would you ever trust security from a website that looks like this? Of course not. Like, so this is weird. This looks like something, that Curtis, not Curtis in ML, the other Curtis, the programming printers guy, has as a website, right? This is a crazy recluse living in the woods who hasn't updated his site in 20 years and just posts crazy things, or possibly a parody. But it only takes a minute of looking at the website to be like, well, something's seriously wrong here. This is not what a viable business or a viable protocol discussion looks like. And if you look back in